All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our keynote speaker for Res Week with the College of Social Work at the University of Kentucky. I hope that the week is going well for you, and I hope that you're hearing lots of interesting and challenging things, and I know that you absolutely will today with our guest, with Tiziana Deering. Tiziana is a former professor in the School of Social Work with Boston College. She's been a commentator and contributor to WBUR, the Boston member station for NPR, and has contributed for more than a decade and has contributed to a number of other regional and national news outlets as well. Prior to joining the Radio Boston team, Dr. Deering was a professor at Boston College where she taught social innovation and leadership. Those are two timely things for all of us, and I'm so glad that she's able to bring that today. Tiziana is also a longtime anti-poverty advocate, where she also ran Boston Rising, a startup anti-poverty fund to end generational poverty in Boston, and was the first woman president of Catholic Charities for the Archdiocese of Boston. Tiziana has won a number of awards in the city, including a Pinnacle Award from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce and Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40. Quite amazing. That's pretty cool. Today's topic, the future of social impact, innovation for this moment and the next, I'm sure will interest all of us. Thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Tiziana Deering. Thank you. You are muted. Sorry, wouldn't be
You
a
would think as a radio host that I would know to unmute myself before starting the presentation. Sorry about that. I promise that is not the shape of things to come. I wonder if before I start, is there a way, and if there's not, that's okay, but is there a way for me to ask what our participants might be most interested in learning or hearing about today? Do you have a chat function where we could just get 3 or 4 popcorns from people about what they're most interested in hearing about?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So if you all want to go ahead and respond on YouTube, we'll get those comments forwarded. And I think that's a great way to get us started today.
Thanks. And while you do that, I'll just round this out a little bit more. So I am in my 5th career. 4 of those 5 careers really focused on social justice as a calling in my life. I did a detour into management consulting for a handful of years in my 20s. I don't regret it one bit. The skill set and the exposure that I developed during that time, especially I had gone from low income micro lending work in Chicago to the belly of a Fortune 10 company in a period of just, I don't know, 2 or 3 months at one point in my career. And that pivot was very helpful. I now am the host of an NPR member station daily news magazine called Radio Boston. And just to give you an example, today we talked about the legislative agenda that remains in Massachusetts for this term with the president of the state Senate. And we talked about our public transit system with the head of the transportation department. Yesterday we talked about rats and the challenge of rats in urban environments, et cetera. Do I have any requests for topics or things people would like to learn about as I get started here? Not yet. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in then. I had an audiovisual aid. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so I am just going to take us through it on my own. And I'd like to start by defining just a few key terms for you, which when we're talking about social impact and social innovation, I think are important. I ran the Center for Social Innovation at the Boston College School of Social Work with Stephanie Berzin, who is now a dean at Simmons in their Department of Social Work, and a professor from the business school and I wrote a book called Managing for Social Impact, published in early 2017, that delved heavily into social innovation and social impact. And I think it's important if you're going to go into this field to understand the difference between social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and social enterprise. So let's start with innovation. That is, and I'm going to use the Center for Social Innovation definition from Boston College. That is a new response to a social problem. And it tends to be a new response to a problem that's been gnarly and with us, the wicked problems, the big problems, for a really long time. The innovation might be a new service, it could be a new organization, it could be a new product, structure, it can even be a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about a problem. All of those things can count as social innovation. And to take us across these definitions, I'm going to use one organization that was in Mary Cronin's and my book, Managing for Social Impact, which is called UTEC, and they are a youth intervention organization based in Lowell, Massachusetts, that work with youth who have historically been high impact gang members in Lowell or Lawrence and get invited on a different path. And the innovation, I would say the first innovation from UTEC is the fact that it was actually started by young people in the community. And their innovation in structure and paradigm has been that young people should call the shots on how the organization is run, what the agenda is. They did the hire of the first executive director, Greg Croto, who is still there 20 years later. They've just celebrated their 20th anniversary. There are a number of other innovations that we could get to with UTEC, but just that one paradigm shift, that young people who are usually cast as troublemakers are actually agents of change and should have the decision-making authority in an organization that's designed to support them. All right, so let's now talk about social entrepreneurship. So that involves the applying of traits of entrepreneurship to social problems. And that's usually through the startup of some kind of enterprise. So entrepreneurship, enterprise is the operation, the business. Entrepreneurship is taking traits of entrepreneurship and applying them to a social problem. This is not the same thing as running an organization as a business. So for example, when I ran Catholic Charities, at that time we were a $40 million operation, and we were serving about 160,000 people a year through human and social services. There were pieces of that operation that I needed to run like a business. We had a fleet of vehicles. A fleet of vehicles is a fleet of vehicles regardless of your mission. And so I'm going to run that as efficiently as possible. But our refugee and immigration services work ran a debt all the time. We were never not going to do that. That wasn't a smart business decision, but it was the right mission decision. So it's not always the same as running something like a business, but it is bringing entrepreneurship, innovation, a sense of how we operate matters to whether or not we can achieve the goal, the mission, and the fact that in that operation, we must achieve a financial outcome that keeps us going and have healthy respect for that. I would say that is social entrepreneurship. In UTEC, one of the things that they did is they recognized that labor skills were going to be important for all the young people that came through their program. And so they developed a series of social enterprises, which we'll discuss further in a minute, but they did them in order to create safe space jobs that people could develop and fail out of. So their first is a mattress recycling business. They can keep the mattress recycling going all the time with 2 workers who just churn them out every day. What that then allows them to do is give jobs to young people entering the program who may fail out of that job 3, 4, 5 times. They talk about, sticking with it over and over again, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 100th chances. And that's entrepreneurship, right? They're taking a new approach. They started an organization to do that. They're providing young people an opportunity to work, but with the mission in the front and center. And yet they've got the ability to run the business and back in a way that allows it to continue to operate. So hopefully no questions so far. Now, a social enterprise, that is something that makes money for an organization. So maybe you think about a museum gift shop that makes money for the museum. That's a social enterprise. At UTEC, after people leave the mattress recycling, if they graduate through that with enough consistency, performance, et cetera, they can learn woodworking. And UTEC sells cutting boards from that woodworking business at Whole Foods markets. You can buy one of their cutting boards. In fact, they build the wooden display racks for produce or other types of products, and Whole Foods buys them. That's a business operation. It still fits the mission, right? Because this is social, still fits the mission, still helps young people develop more productive labor, but it also is just revenue, money that they need to continue to operate. So I'm hoping that those are very helpful to you, because we tend to kind of toss these terms around, social innovation, and you're a social entrepreneur, and this is social entrepreneurship. But it's a thing, and those definitions and distinctions are important. All right, so bear with me just a minute longer, because we also have this whole bundle around corporate social responsibility and ESG. All right, so corporate social responsibility is a very old concept now. I mean, I remember people treating it like it was the new thing in the early 90s when I was running a center on nonprofit organizations at Harvard, which was career number 3. And at that time, the thought was that a business actually has a responsibility. pretty much that was the innovation at the time. Since then, that's evolved significantly. You know, some of the early players in that, IKEA is often well respected, Patagonia is often well respected as having adopted corporate social responsibility early. In our book, Managing for Social Impact, we have a chapter on that. Those are two of the feature organizations that the authors wrote about. But now we talk about sustainability in a whole new way, and that you may hear in your work, especially if you're interested in environmental justice, you may hear a phrase called ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance. And that is a set of expectations that any business, any for-profit business, actually has an obligation to be tracking its track record on its impact on the environment, its impact on the social structures and social justice outcomes where it operates, and on its impact on governance. Now you can think, you know, blood diamonds, you can think relationship with corrupt governments, et cetera. And there are massive initiatives. The one I would point to is the Global Reporting Initiative that have really developed iterative standards over time that hold for-profit organizations accountable and give them a framework to do much more sophisticated tracking of, are you environmentally responsible? Are you socially responsible? Are you responsible in terms of fostering governance that supports democracy and drives subsidiarity to the people closest to the problem? I wonder if I could just take a quick break, Kaylee, and just see if there are any questions so far.
Absolutely. Actually, we have a couple, so thank you so much for that. And it was, I think it was really helpful for me even to hear how to kind of distinguish between social innovation and social enterprise and what those differences are. One question from Letha is, given samples of types of innovations in the field, are there innovative spaces that can provide employment positions that just aren't well publicized? How can we find these kinds of positions?
You know, so there's a growing network of organizations that are getting good at recognizing the need for the employment piece of this puzzle. They are often sort of raised up in the rock star nonprofit realm. So you're going to hear about Homeboy Industries. You're going to hear about UTech. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the one out of New York. I'm sorry, I've lost it off the top of my head. So you're going to hear about those, but actually best in class organizations, especially those working with youth or those working with adult basic education and workforce development, often, I mean, there are Catholic charities all around the country. There are Lutheran social services organizations all around the country. I picked those because those were more my world, that have really cracked this nut. And so the thing to do is to find the organizations in your community that are really effective at working with young people or working with adults who are working on ESOL and adult basic education. And chances are, if they're worth their salt, they've already started to crack this nut, and you can find it through them.
Fantastic. And kind of another kind of relevant to the employment position is Victoria wanted to check in with you and see your thoughts on how to create a job for yourself to solve the problem that you've identified.
Yeah, so that's such a great question. When I was at BC, I was the chair of our macro curriculum, and we had a concerted teaching focus on social innovation and leadership for our macro curriculum, and I taught the core course on social innovation and leadership. And one of the things in that was, how do you find your way through a career path on a social problem that you want to solve? Again, there's a difference between what's famous and what works. And the Venn diagram, there is one, right? There are some organizations that are famous and work, but there's a whole lot more out there that works that nobody knows about. And so, honest to God, given what it costs to start something up, to launch something and get it going and sustain it, and having run both a 100-year-old organization and a startup that lit up like a supernova and then failed, and I've done both, the first step is to try to find an organization doing good work on the social problem that you care about. And I would say the most important thing is actually not the work, it's the framing. Do they see the problem the way you do? Are they passionate about the problem? Do they understand the person experiencing the problem in the same robust human capability focused lens that you as a social worker do? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
Maybe one more question and then I'll present a little more.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So next we have, can you maybe share a little bit about how you've demonstrated relevance of your mission to groups that might not be as supportive or might be outright resistant to that mission?
Oh, yeah. Oh, and do I have stories? So when we started Boston Rising, I went to this really famous business plan competition, trying to learn, because we were at Boston Rising in the early days, especially attempting to make our pitches to raise our money kind of from the venture capital world, as opposed to the traditional foundation world. So you got to get all fancy and you got to do the business plan and you got to win your pitch competitions. And we were focused on breaking the generational cycle of poverty in a specific Boston neighborhood, in an historically Black Boston neighborhood. And I went into the business plan competition. We had our slides and we had our business case and we'd run our numbers, and I started, and you kind of went into these booths. It was rapid fire. There would be like 2 booths, 2 judges per booth, and you'd get like cattle. You'd get sent into a booth and you had 10 minutes to make your pitch. And I got 1 minute into my pitch and the judges said, stop. And I was like, ugh. And they said, yeah, we just don't believe that that's possible. Right? We reject the premise. You can't break generational cycles of poverty. It's poverty. People have always been poor. People are always going to be poor. You're boiling the ocean here. We just don't buy it. We need business plans for things that are realistic. And that was a really important moment in my development and understanding. And I have taught and advocated for, and it's something I was going to bring up later in this presentation, but I'll bring up now, that we are at a point in our systems where the true innovation is in belief, that the work now is to innovate in belief. And what I mean by that is really fundamentally doing the work to change people's minds about what's important, what's happening, right? If you make a frame, and I hope you at home will actually do this right now. Make a frame, and I want you to hold it up, and I want you to look at what you're seeing in the room and describe it to yourself a little bit. And then I want you to shift that frame 6 inches. All right. And now look at what you're seeing in the room and describe it to yourself. And my guess is that there's almost nothing in the frame here that was in the frame here, but it's all in the room. But you were controlling the focus. You were controlling the narrative of what was in the box. And those are places of important innovation. And if you don't believe me, then I would refer you to 2016. So that would be, that's a really, really important part of this, is finding organizations that frame the problem and have an understanding of the system in the way that your social work values, your social work code of ethics, your training and your research tell you is right. Then the work follows. So I actually also just gave away part of the second half of my presentation. Do you want me to do one more question? Or you want me to kind of plow along for a little while?
If you want to go along, we'll get some more time then.
Okay, so I have now, so that kind of gets us through our terms. I'm hoping that that's helpful. I also hope that you will choose to be ecumenical, small e, about the organizational form in which you consider working. And what I mean by that is, we do not live in a world of corporations bad, nonprofits good, government ineffective or inefficient. None of that is true. We have a fascinating landscape of for-profit companies, nonprofit organizations, foundations, philanthropies, B corporations, limited liability companies. And within that landscape, some are doing incredible social mission work across all those organizational forms, and some are doing terrible things across all those organizational forms. So I would encourage you to not let the form be the driving factor, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I brought to you some lessons, first from my life in human services and social services, and then from my life the last 3 years in broadcasting. And in human services and social services, I'm going to focus on the really big things that have to happen for sustained attention on the big social problems. So generational equity, the racial wealth gap, the school performance gap. So racial wealth gap, let's just pick that one. In Boston, the 2015 report on Black wealth found, and this is not a mistake, that the average wealth among a white family in Greater Boston was $249,000. And among Black families, it was $8. That is not a mistake. 249, 248, 249 versus $8. There's only two options in terms of belief there. Either you reprehensibly believe that there is some fundamental difference between the white families and the Black families in Greater Boston that leads to that wealth gap, or you recognize that there is clearly something long-term systemic going on. And then, of course, we can dive into redlining and the limitations of the GI Bill and physical infrastructure and how neighborhoods are designed and where mortgages were allowed, et cetera. When one wants to tackle those big problems, it's going to take lots of people, lots of organizations, and a level of sustained focus that isn't all that popular, even in nonprofits, right? We like that 3-year fix, that 5-year fix. You're talking about generational fixes. So there's 4 things we've learned, I think, and I've learned in practice that I think are important. 1, have some humility about who the stakeholders are. More people are stakeholders in the work that you're doing, whatever organization you're in or whatever clinical work you're doing, than you think. And the officials and the official institution have hubris if they try to decide, oh, these are the stakeholders and these aren't. There could be community groups, there could be mothers and fathers, there could be teachers, there could be a Parks and Rec person who has a deep stake and who can bring resources. Maybe it's social capital in the neighborhood, maybe it's ideas about things they've seen work elsewhere that actually have an impact on the problem, but are not formally recognized. So creating a space for people to self-declare, I have a stake in this problem. My neighborhood, my community association, my tenants association, whatever it is, we are stakeholders. We bring something to the table. You should recognize what we bring to the table and let us play at the table is really, really important. And when organizations, even groups of organizations, seek control by over-defining who the stakeholders are, they both misdiagnose the problem often and miss resources that could be brought to bear. The second is success needs to be mutual, and that's different than proportional. And here's what I mean by that. Organizations may put resources into a problem. So let's say, I'm thinking about the Dot-Well collaborative that was between 3 youth-facing and healthcare organizations in Boston, in the Dorchester neighborhood during a series of summers where youth violence was particularly high. And so they pooled all of their resources and ran all of their summer programming together in a way that it was invisible to the young people and to families. Okay, this is a Dot-Well, this is a Dorchester Multi-Services Center program. This is a Catholic Charities program. This is a teen empowerment program. None of that mattered. It was just a set of programming over the summer. Different organizations had more and less money. They had more and fewer staff. But the victories, the definition of what was successful, who could claim success, et cetera, was not based on who put the most in. It was based on who got the most benefit. And that, of course, was the kids. So their success was the metric, not did we get enough money back on what we put in. I can't see you, so I don't know if this is a concept that's coming across, but I'm really hoping that it is. So success is not defined as I get out as much as I put in. Success is defined as the social problem changes in the following ways. And different organizations and different resources will cost more or less. And that's really not what's important. The third thing is tenacity. And that is recognizing how patient one has to be to manage social change over a long time while being constantly impatient that it's not happening faster. And so you want people in your organization who are railing against the system at the same time that you've got people who are prepared to tirelessly work within the system so that you're applying external pressure and an impatience for change and the ability to work inside the system at the same time. The last thing is choice and control, choice and control, choice and control. choice and control. In the social work code of ethics, it's subsidiarity. Those who experience the problem need more say, more control, more choice in solving the problem. They need to be trusted with more resources. They need to be understood as problem solvers in their own lives. We need to let go of our bigotries about what causes poverty, because they are often grossly incorrect. And we need to put subsidiarity front and center in our work. All right, so those are the lessons from service. Why don't I take a break again now? I think I saw some stuff pop up in the chat.
Absolutely.
Plus, I need a sip of my Diet Coke.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I had trouble with my video. I think it was that lack of patience that you were referring to earlier. So kept clicking the button. First of all, those are amazing things. And that last thing that you said about trusting people with resources and empowering them to make those decisions. I love that choice and control that you mentioned. Whenever you were talking about connecting allies, and you talked about for-profit corporations, you talked about nonprofit, and you also talked about government ones. One of the questions was, how do you really pull together those stakeholders, and how have you been able to do that? What surprised you? Because you were even talking about neighborhood associations and, you know, getting at a very granular in the weeds level, and the humility about those stakeholders. How has there been something that surprised you, that maybe something happened and it kind of reframed some things for you? And then how do you put them together?
Yeah, so I would give you a couple of things there. And one is that both happily and sadly, in a community, the way that happens is through building trust. And I say sadly because that takes time, right? And so doing the work to build relationships, to demonstrate trustworthiness, to listen, to be present in other people's spaces in a way that doesn't demand attention, but instead, you know, you go to that community meeting. So we used to run these, we called them marketplaces at Boston Rising. We ran them in the public library in Roxbury near the Burke High School one summer. They were on Thursday night. We would provide food. We would provide childcare in the library so that adults, if they wanted, could come without their kids. And after a quick icebreaker, the whole thing was the people who came that night got to pick the agenda. They got to say, hey, here's what I came to talk about. Does anybody want to talk about this? And we would then provide some structure and facilitation, but the community members who came were the ones that set the agenda. And if they came back 3-4 weeks because they wanted to do more work on it, fine. And if they didn't, fine, right? But that's how that worked. And invariably, there would be fancy pants who came, and they would be from local businesses and banks and the big foundations. And it was fascinating to watch which fancy pants could do it and which couldn't. And the fancy pants who could do it didn't act like fancy pants, simply introduced themselves, picked the circle that they were most interested in, that a resident said, I would like to talk about summer camps and accessibility of summer camps, shut up, sat down, and acted like any other participant. And the fancy pants who couldn't do it would stand in the back of the room with their arms folded, watching like they were fancy and talking to each other like this, which of course undermines also all of the trust and structure, right, that you're building in the room in the moment. So I will tell you, not everybody can do it. Status is so important to some people that they can't do it. Get them out of the room, take them on a tour or something while that's happening. And if they can do it, invite them to delve deeper. Invite them to walk the neighborhood with you the next day and knock on doors and ask people what they care about. And what's important about those steps is, once again, if you do that correctly, you go to the door or you stop someone at a bus stop and you say, may I please speak with you? They're the one that gets to decide if you have a conversation or not. They're the ones with the power of acceptance or rejection, right? And that really changes the dynamic, especially for power holders in powerful organizations. Does that help?
Absolutely. Well, I'm saying that, but hopefully others too. So
you're the proxy for now.
There we go. From Jennifer, we also have, could you please share another example of your statement that success needs to be mutual?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a really, okay, here's a great example of this. And this was not an organization I was involved with, but Steve Greeley who I am so embarrassed. He just changed his organization's name, and I cannot remember the new name of the organization. So that part's not going to help you very much. But when his organization was working under the old name, they worked on a thing that's fairly well known called the Kalamazoo Promise. Now, Kalamazoo is in Michigan. It happens to be next door to my old hometown, Battle Creek, Michigan. But Kalamazoo wanted to do this program where if you got certain grades in high school, the community put together a bunch of funders and they would fund you for college. And nobody was taking them up on it. And they had all this money, and they had lots of young people in the public school system who qualified at the end of their senior year and weren't doing it. And the reason was because they didn't ask families how that structure would work for them. What did they need? How should the money come in? Do they need it right away? Are gap years necessary? What kind of work do people need to also have in order to get their tuition free? Because God knows college is more expensive than just the tuition. But they never asked any of those questions. So they had defined success as we pay for college. But that was not the definition of success in the community. And so when Steve and his associates went in and sort of went back, said, let's back up. Let's do a bunch of listening. Let's go to churches. Let's go to pastors. Let's go to teachers and principals, right? Let's go to the Chamber of Commerce and ask them, what does success look like? And then say, we'd like to work on that by transforming the Kalamazoo Promise. Would you like to join us? And then all the yeses sign up. The nos, they go about their business. All the yeses sign up. And now you go through a process to redesign the program. Now you get change. So there's another example for you.
Yeah, that's a really great one. And so it really speaks back to when you said success is defined as when the social problem changes. So they were having support for people to go to college, but people weren't taking advantage of that. So
that's right, because it wasn't designed in a way that was of service to the people.
Right, you didn't fit their need. I love it. One more, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I'm here for you. I'm here to be of service to you.
Thank you. So I think we have some students who in their role of social workers have maybe experienced some reluctance or hesitancy, if not outright resistance. The next question is from Victoria. So whenever you say people being impacted, when you say people being impacted by the problem need to be heard more, how do you execute when the people that need to hear them already think that they're listening?
Yeah, so hello, right? That's the problem. That is the problem. And I'll give you an example from Battle Creek, Michigan. Actually, this was a chapter in our book. And this was a project that worked really, really well for about 10 years, Project 2020. And then when the power dynamics in the community changed and they could no longer mitigate the myopia of the power holders, it stopped working. So I want to be very transparent about that. These successes can come and go as well. What they did was they just started ignoring the community foundation, the corporate foundation, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and they just started holding public meetings and doing that thing like what Steve Greeley did. Is this something you'd like to work on? And then working with the people who said yes and kept showing up. And they just developed, and they would invite the head of the foundation, the head of the community foundation, the head of the board of realtors. They would invite them to come, and then they would do this in the background. So then they'd send them back out again, and they would just keep going. And what they were able to do, I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of track 2 diplomacy. It was made famous really during the Cuban Missile Crisis when Bobby Kennedy went underground and talked to a lower level diplomat in Russia while the famous track 1s, right, Khrushchev and Kennedy were battling it out. They did track 2. They did track 2 planning. They did track 2 resource investment. Now their changes had to be on a much smaller scale because they couldn't muster the same resources. But here's the interesting thing. Once those changes started to work, guess who wanted in? Right? The money, the power brokers, once things started to work, they said, how about we put something behind that? Now, then the challenge is, do they want to put money in and allow it to work the way it's been designed? Or do they want to say, well, no, but here's what we think. And so now you have to change your programming, right? And that's always a tension. But track 2, I have learned, is a very disruptive, but very effective way to make change. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So shall we go to some of the lessons from broadcasting now as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I want to make sense of this for you a little bit. So broadcasting is my fifth career. I'd done commentary, on Point, on Radio Boston. I had done some television, CNN, MSNBC commentary, usually on poverty and inequality. And then I developed a passion for the broadcasting piece of it, the journalism piece of it in a very specific way. I was kind of soul searching and knew I was going to move on from the School of Social Work at Boston College, trying to figure out, was I really sure I wanted to do that and what would come next? And a friend of mine who actually worked with corporate branding knew I was going away for a weekend, and he brought me a packet and he said, okay, this is the brand audit that we put a company through, and I want you to put yourself through it this weekend. And I'm like, he's like, no, just do it. Trust me. So over the weekend, I did it. And it was incredibly helpful because in the end, when you do all the brand audit stuff, what's your competitive advantage? Who else is working in your strategic area? All these different things. You come up with a statement. You can call it a mission statement. You can call it whatever you want. And mine at the end of the weekend was, I help people understand complex problems and solve them for the common good. And that was revelatory for me because I had spent the first half of my career in the solve area. How do we work on these? How do we work on these? Running organizations, et cetera, CEO or executive director a number of times. But I realized that what I had a passion for and was increasingly good at was helping people understand those complex problems. And the classroom had been one place to do that. But having an opportunity to have a platform to take what's happening in the world around us, really right here around us every day, and help people make sense of it so they know how to be in that world today, this day, and tomorrow, and the next day. So it helps them think about how they want to vote. It helps them think about where they want to put their money. It helps them think about what they want to advocate for in their public schools, et cetera. That seemed like a really transformative opportunity. And that's how I wound up as the host of a local daily 1 hour live public radio news magazine, for lack of a better word. So I start in June of 2019. And in the first 6 months, I think, oh my God, or the first 7 or 8 months, we've been through 2 impeachments. There've been a massive shootings. We've done kids in cages. I can't even tell you how much had gone down in the first 6 months. And people were sort of joking, okay, you've gotten about 2 years of broadcasting under your belt, hosting under your belt in these first 6 months. And that was before COVID. And it was before George Floyd. Those 2 things came along. And now we have an incredibly important social mission, which is to help people understand these complex problems. We have a specific way that we believe in doing it, which is what we call the town hall meets the kitchen table. And what that means is that even when you're talking to elected officials, you are having the kind of conversation with them and holding them to having the kind of conversation that you would sitting around your kitchen table with a cup of coffee. And your neighbors are at that table too. They're always welcome at the table. All of a sudden we had to pivot to doing that remotely when no one could see each other and none of us knew how to do that. So we start that with the pandemic, and then the murder of George Floyd happens in late May 2020. And now we are also responsible, and should have been long before, let me be very clear about that, responsible for understanding the racist backdrop in which everything was unfolding, naming it, calling it out, talking about it in a new and sustained way. Even as COVID, somebody said to me once on air, COVID isn't the elephant in the room, it's the room now. So even as you're recognizing that you're doing all of this in the COVID room. When you get that right, it's really incredible. I'll give you an example. She is now the US Attorney for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Rachel Rollins. She's a reformer. Some of you may have heard of her, especially after Tom Cotton tried to stop her appointment as US Attorney after she was a reformist district attorney in Suffolk County in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'd known her for several years before in other relationships. We'd had her on the show a bunch. The Friday after George Floyd was murdered, she came on air and referred to it as murder, openly and passionately. And at that time, we did not have any representatives of law enforcement in our Commonwealth who were calling it murder. And I asked her about that, and she leaned into that and talked passionately about that. And that's that town hall meets kitchen table. So that was just 2020. And then, of course, we've gone forward with so much since then. And there are a few lessons that have come out of that as well. One is innovation and belief, which I've already talked to you. Two is calling people for sustained attention to change on the same scale as the problem. And so I'll give you an example. A city initiative may say this is a 5-year city initiative. Well, it didn't take 5 years for the problem to form. So why are we doing 5 years for the problem to be solved? Granted, probably your mayor has a 4-year election cycle, but there are plenty of people in the city working on a social problem who can hold the city accountable beyond the election cycle. So fighting back on these short timeframes for long-term problems. The next is actually better and fewer metrics. I'll give you a very specific example, scale. People like scale. You got to get bigger. You got to take it to more places. You have to take it to more cities. You have to be in 4 neighborhoods now instead of 2. Kirsten Lodel, who was the founder of LIFT, which is a national program that operates in several cities, a number of years ago said, scale is killing us. That's not what I want to do anymore. I don't want to go to scale by taking this to more places. I want to go to scale by getting more results with the people we already serve. So if we help them work out their way out of poverty by advocating for themselves, if that's achievement number 1, then achievement number 2 is what's the next goal they have? How does that become our metric, and do we help them achieve it? So staying sustained and deep where we are versus success is we do that first thing more places. The next is prevention versus detention. And that's a phrase that was used by a board member of mine during the economic meltdown of 2009. The state was slashing human services budgets. And he said in a board meeting, sooner or later, people are going to understand that we can either invest in prevention or we can invest in detention. And detention costs a lot more. We are in a moment now where when we're recognizing with climate, we're recognizing with the cradle to prison pipeline, we're recognizing with the challenges of our public infrastructure, that when you reap the lack of investment in prevention, detention is incredibly expensive. And so there's a moment here to start to make a new case for preventive investments, whether it's infrastructure or childcare, et cetera, that they cost less in the future. This is a moment that calls for many leaders on a small scale. Right after the Buffalo grocery store shooting, we had a segment and review conversation at the end of the week where we take 2 of our analysts and have a really deep, 25-minute thoughtful conversation about whatever was the big story of the week. And we had former Boston City Councilor and mayoral candidate Tito Jackson, and we had a columnist for the Boston Globe. And the Boston Globe columnist said at one point, I think what I'm wondering right now is, where is that leader? We used to have those big leaders and now we don't. Tito's answer was, we have lots of those leaders and they're everywhere. And what we need to do is begin to understand that our leadership is local. And then after the show, one of our crew members said, the big leaders are dead. People killed them. And so don't be surprised that they're not here now. And how do we support our small local leaders as they ascend? And then I think the last thing is that we are in a place of dishonest debate. And it's an incredibly gnarly situation. Social media makes it very hard to solve. But solutions are possible on the local level, and creating spaces for honest, thoughtful debate that are uncomfortable for everybody, including you and what you believe, are important to rebuilding the fabric of community so that we can be collaborative in solving our public problems. So those are what I would say are the lessons that I've learned on the broadcasting side. Sorry, that went a little longer, that part, than I thought. Let me stop there. Take some more questions.
Wonderful, thank you. One thing I love is that it sounds like you absolutely garner and gather these opportunities to learn, and they're synthesized through your life work. So I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions, if that's okay, and I guess we're not too far away from time too. So can you talk a little bit about, Alan wants to know, how is your NPR radio platform elevated your ability to reach others through social innovation?
So it's a really great question, and it's a challenging question, because when I chose to be a journalist and a host, I actually stepped back entirely from advocacy.
Oh, wow.
And I have to. It's actually in our journalistic standards. So I'll give you an example. We normally air at 11 a.m. We knew that when Roe came down, the Supreme Court would release that ruling between 10 and 11 a.m. and there would be special coverage. But we built a shadow show for 3 p.m. so that we could, because our show re-airs at 3. So we built a live show that we held in the background until whatever day that was, because there were like 10 days when it could have happened. And we did a special live show at 3 o'clock. And my job was to put all the voices on, and facilitate a conversation among them to advance an understanding of where we were in the moment, what the issues were given what had just happened, and what was likely to come next. And solutions that I thought worked, not my job, right? And in fact, it's not just not my job. I would be bad at my job and undermine what I can do in this space if I did that. Now, what I can do is when I recognize an organization that has the hallmarks of what I've learned about social innovation, I can say to my team, I think we ought to have them on and talk to them,
Sure.
right? And we can do that. And if the team agrees, if the team believes that journalistically that makes good sense and that it's news for our listeners and it helps them understand their community better, but I also subjugate myself to the team in those moments, right? To make sure. So I'm not sure I've encountered anything that's quite as hard actually as that. I love having opinions and ideas about what we ought to do. That's not the job now, and it's a privilege to be of service in that very specific way at this stage in my life.
That's so interesting when you talk about having to have all the voices on, because that probably goes to the lesson you learned about how common dishonest debate is right now and the impact that it has as well. So trying to live into that space of creating honest debate is probably hard.
Yeah, and I completely forgot about this, but I did a couple of pilots for a pseudo reality show. Long story short, we filmed in Boston, we filmed in Chicago. The idea was, could you take one of those sort of MTV house models, but do it in a thoughtful way that fosters dialogue and bring people together across difference. Wow. Keep them together in a living situation for a few days and see if you could create some thoughtful, honest dialogue. And I hosted those. And those were cut together into a PBS special, a 1 hour PBS special called Divided We Fall. And I feel very strongly about that work. I think it was very good work. And in Divided We Fall, one of the things that we learned was there is a difference between honest debate and fake truth. And we have to understand the difference between information, fact, and personal belief and truth. Truth, it actually turns out to be not a very helpful concept, I think, because people always just immediately move to, well, this is my truth, right? And what you're really saying, this is my belief, which is informed by my lived experience. And that's valid and accurate, right? This is my belief informed by my lived experience. That's really productive and helpful. And being able to distinguish between fact and information and belief, right, are really important pieces of having this conversation. So if you're bringing stuff that isn't fact, you don't recognize it as rooted in your own belief based on your lived experience, and therefore don't have humility about those beliefs, right? Or if you're presenting poor quality information, you're not actually having honest debate. You're just mucking up the works. So that's the other thing, is doing the work to make sure that that is what comes to the table.
Makes complete sense. Is it okay? Time for one more question?
Up to you. I'm happy to do it.
Oh, I'm going to say yes then. Thank you. The question is that whenever you describe the town hall as meeting kitchen table philosophy, and that pulls in a variety of stakeholders, how do you ensure that that depth related to client needs is addressed? And I think that this came in around the time that you were talking about the person who didn't necessarily want to scale. They wanted to fix the problem and not just superficially address it.
Yeah. Can you repeat? I think I know how I want to answer this, but will you repeat the very first part of the question, please?
It was in reference to your description of the town hall meets kitchen table philosophy, and you pull in that variety of stakeholders. How do you make sure that the client's needs are met with that depth versus the superficial?
Yeah. So I think you do a couple of things there. The clients have to be at the table. I mean, you can't meet their needs with depth unless they're at the table as equal partners, not as displays, but as equal partners. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing is I work pretty hard when I'm going to do a quality interview to set the table literally and figuratively, right, with the guest. Developing some rapport first, talking about things that are important to them, asking them questions that invite them to connect with me and answer in a more authentic, personal way, rather than letting them slide into their talking points where they can then comfortably stay for the rest of the discussion. And so there is actually a lot of table setting that goes into creating those spaces. And that both comes from experience, but also from all kinds of techniques that one is taught as a social worker. So you just bring those to the table and use it to set.
It's fantastic. Well, I thank you so much. I did get the name of the PBS special, so I'm going to Google it as soon as we're off.
Divided we fall.
And then also, I think, Tiziana, you had a book that you referenced. Can you share the name of that in case folks want to check that out as well?
Yeah, but I would recommend that you literally check it out from a library. Don't buy it because it's in the textbook area. And so it's prohibitively expensive for personal use, but you can find it in academic libraries, et cetera. It's called Managing for Social Impact.
Nice.
And Mary Cronin, Cronin, and I were the editors. And if nothing else, I would recommend reading both the Haley House Bakery Cafe chapter and the UTEC chapters.
Okay, fantastic. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I know that our time is at an end. It went very quickly. So thank you so much for sharing kind of a lot of lessons learned, but certainly in helping us understand more about social innovation and social impact, as well as in differentiating from social enterprise too. I know that it's certainly our college is focusing on more of this. We're going to have an elective on social innovation starting in the spring semester. So it's timely academically, but most importantly, it's timely in the career of all of our students who've joined us for the DSW on their path, on their social work career path. So we greatly appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.
It was a privilege to be able to be of service to you. I hope it helped. And thank you for your commitment to this work.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care now.